What if the biggest problem with your communication isn't your vocabulary, your confidence, your accent, or even your ability to tell a good story? What if the real problem is something much simpler? You are thinking about yourself too much. Think about the last time you walked into a conversation and suddenly became aware of everything you were doing. Do I sound confident? Was that answer stupid? Am I talking too much? What should I say next? Do they like me? And the moment your brain starts asking all those questions, something strange happens. You stop communicating, you start performing, and people can feel the difference. Here is the idea I want you to understand today. Because once this clicks, the way you speak, listen, tell stories, handle awkward moments, and even build confidence can change permanently. Communication is not about proving yourself. Communication is about making the other person feel something, understand something, or discover something. That sounds simple, but most people live their entire lives doing the opposite. They enter conversations thinking, how can I sound interesting? Confident communicators walk in thinking, how can I become interested? That tiny shift changes everything. I remember a conversation where someone was telling me about a difficult experience they had at work, and I could have responded with advice. I could have told them about something similar that happened to me. I could have tried to sound intelligent. Instead, I asked one question. What was the hardest part for you? They paused, and suddenly the conversation became deeper. Why? Because I wasn't trying to control the conversation. I was trying to understand the person. That is the first thing you need to understand. Great communication starts when curiosity becomes stronger than your need to impress. Think about the people you love talking to. Are they always the smartest people in the room? Probably not. Are they constantly telling amazing stories? Not necessarily. But when you're talking to them, you feel heard. You feel like they actually want to know what you're thinking. And that feeling is incredibly powerful. Most people listen while preparing their next sentence. Someone is speaking, and inside your head you're already thinking, okay, after they finish, I'll tell them what happened to me. You're not listening. You're waiting, and there's a huge difference. Try something different today. The next time someone tells you something, don't immediately connect it back to yourself. Don't say, oh yeah, that happened to me too. Instead, stay with their story. Ask, what happened next? Ask, how did that make you feel? Ask, what made you decide to do that? You don't need 10 questions. You need genuine attention, because people may forget your exact words, but they rarely forget how they felt when they were around you. And here's where it gets interesting. When you stop trying to impress people, you actually become more impressive. Why? Because you become present. And presence is one of the most underrated communication skills in the world. Have you ever spoken to someone who was physically in front of you, but mentally somewhere else? They're looking at their phone. Their eyes are moving around the room. They're waiting for their chance to speak. How does it feel? You immediately feel less important. Now reverse it. Imagine someone looks at you, listens carefully, doesn't rush you, and responds to exactly what you said. You feel important. That's the power of presence. And presence doesn't mean staring intensely into someone's soul like you're solving a murder. It simply means giving the conversation your attention. Put the phone away. Stop rehearsing your next sentence. Listen to the actual words. Notice their emotion, and most importantly, respond to what they mean, not just what they say. Because communication happens on two levels. There are the words, and then there is the meaning underneath the words. Someone says, I'm fine, but their voice is quiet. Their smile disappears quickly. Their body language changes. Are they really fine? Maybe, maybe not. A strong communicator learns to notice. They might say, you sound like something's on your mind. Want to talk about it. That's not manipulation. That's awareness. You're paying attention to the person behind the sentence. And this brings us to another major shift. You don't need to become more interesting. You need to become more interested. Think about that. People spend years trying to collect interesting stories, impressive facts, clever jokes, and sophisticated vocabulary because they believe that's what makes someone charismatic. But here's the secret. An interesting person isn't necessarily someone who has an extraordinary life. An interesting person is someone who sees ordinary things in an extraordinary way. You don't need to travel to 20 countries to tell a great story. You can tell a story about getting coffee. You can tell a story about your first day at a new job. You can tell a story about making a terrible decision and what it taught you. The difference is not the event. The difference is the meaning. Imagine two people describing the same experience. Person one says, I went to an interview. It lasted 30 minutes. They asked me some questions. Then I went home. Technically, that's a story, but nobody cares. Now imagine someone says, well, I walked into that interview convinced I was ready. 5 minutes later, the interviewer asked me one question I hadn't prepared for. And suddenly, I forgot how to speak English. Now you're listening. Why? Because there is emotion. There is tension. There is vulnerability. There is something at stake. Great communication isn't about giving people more information. It's about giving information meaning. So the next time you tell a story, don't just explain what happened. Tell us what you felt. Tell us what surprised you. Tell us what you believed before the experience and what you believe now. That is how ordinary experiences become memorable. And there's another communication mistake that almost everyone makes. They confuse speaking more with communicating better. You don't need more words. You need better words. Think about this. If I ask you a question and you answer for 5 minutes, have you communicated more than someone who answers in 30 seconds? Not necessarily. You may have simply created more opportunities for confusion. Sometimes the most powerful communication is a sentence followed by silence. But silence makes people uncomfortable. You say something and then your brain screams, "Say something else!" So you keep talking. You explain, then you explain your explanation, then you give an example of the explanation. And suddenly the point you made 3 sentences ago has disappeared underneath 12 more sentences. Have you ever done that? You say something perfectly clear, then immediately ruin it by adding, "But I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, it's just my opinion." I mean, obviously there are other ways to look at it. Why did you do that? Because you're asking the other person to approve your thought before they've even had a chance to respond. Confidence isn't always speaking with more certainty. Sometimes confidence is being comfortable enough to stop, say what you mean, then breathe. Let the other person think. Silence isn't failure. Silence is space. And people need space to process what you've said. Try this today before adding another sentence. Ask yourself, does this make my message clearer? Or am I just uncomfortable with silence? That one question can transform the way you speak. But there's something even deeper underneath all of this. Your communication is often a reflection of the relationship you have with yourself. If you're terrified of being judged, you'll constantly edit yourself. If you're desperate to be liked, you'll agree with everyone. If you don't trust yourself, you'll over-explain. If you're afraid of making mistakes, you'll speak cautiously. And if you believe you have to prove your worth, every conversation becomes a performance. That's exhausting. Imagine trying to play tennis while simultaneously watching yourself play tennis. Was that a good shot? Did I look stupid? What does the other person think? You'd become terrible at the game. Communication is the same. The more you monitor yourself, the less present you become. So instead of asking, "How am I doing?" ask, "What is happening right now?" Instead of, "Do they like me?" ask, "What can I learn about this person?" Instead of, "Did I sound intelligent?" ask, "Did I make my idea clear?" Instead of, "What should I say next?" or ask, "What are they really trying to tell me?" Do you see the difference? Your attention moves from yourself to the conversation, and that is where confidence begins. Not when you finally become fearless, but when you stop making yourself the center of every interaction. You realize something incredibly freeing. You are allowed to be imperfect. You are allowed to pause. You are allowed to forget a word. You are allowed to tell a bad joke. You are allowed to have an awkward moment. And here's the funny thing. The moment you stop being terrified of awkwardness, you become much less awkward. Because awkwardness often comes from resistance. You say something strange, then panic. You try to fix it. The more you fix it, the stranger it becomes. Sometimes the best response is simply, "Well, that came out terribly." And then laugh. That's it. You're human. People don't need you to be perfect. They need you to be real. And this is why the greatest communication skill isn't speaking, it's connecting. Words are simply the vehicle. Connection is the destination. So the next time you walk into a conversation, remember these ideas. Become more curious than impressive. Listen to understand instead of waiting to respond. Pay attention to the emotion underneath the words. Tell stories through meaning, not just events. Say what you mean without drowning your message in unnecessary words. And most importantly, stop treating every conversation like an audition. You don't have to earn your right to be there. You don't have to prove you're smart. You don't have to make everyone like you. Your job is simply to be present enough to understand and brave enough to express yourself honestly. Because when you change the way you see communication, communication itself changes. You stop asking, "How can I sound better?" and you start asking, "How can I connect better?" You stop trying to be the most interesting person in the room, and you become the person who makes everyone else feel interesting. You stop filling every silence, and you learn to let your words breathe. You stop performing confidence, and you begin experiencing it. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson of all. The goal of communication isn't to make people remember how impressive you were. It's to make them remember how they felt when they were talking to you. So here's your challenge. In your next conversation, forget about being impressive. Forget about saying the perfect thing. Forget about planning your next sentence. Look at the person. Listen. Get curious. Ask one question you genuinely want the answer to, then stay quiet long enough to hear it. Because the moment you stop trying to be heard and start trying to understand, something changes. Your conversations become easier. Your confidence becomes quieter. Your stories become better. Your relationships become deeper. And eventually you realize that becoming a better communicator was never really about finding better words. It was about becoming more present for the person standing in front of you. Understand that, and your communication doesn't just improve, it changes forever.